everybody. This is exciting. Hello, hello, hello. So first I want to say thank you to Second Church Ventura for inviting me. When I spoke with them originally, and it was going to be a virtual Bible study, and we had the idea, let's open it to everybody. We really did not expect this wonderful response. We have hundreds of people, frankly, and we're just thrilled. So if any of you had a problem with the technology, thank you for your patience. It takes quite a platform to do a course like this. So I'm going to be reading so that I will be the most efficient and looking down a little bit, but I will put the slides up in a minute. But I just wanted to say a few things. It's obvious that we're in a very different situation than we thought any of us would be in 6 weeks ago. And when the Ventura Church initially invited me to do a Bible study with them, I thought it might be on one of Paul's letters or something, a brief biblical book we could do in a short 4 weeks. But as I slept on it and prayed about it and thought, I realized we need to talk about community in the Bible. And that's so ironic because most of us are sheltering in place, and we have never not experienced community at this level in our lives, I suspect. And at one level, we're cut off more than we've ever been, but at another, we're more connected than we've been because, as you know, many families are having game nights and getting together, and this technology enables us to do that. So the theme for this was really an effort to address this thought of community, which is ironic at a time when it's a two-sided coin. On the one hand, there's a great fear of others in the sense of, is my neighbor going to transmit a disease to me? On the other hand, you see so many stories of people who are having an incredible sense of community right where they are by helping their neighbor or doing whatever is needed. So this is community in action, assisting, supporting, dialing down some of the anxiety about these challenging times. So while you no doubt have been praying for yourself, your loved ones, your family, and I'm sure a larger circle, this course is really designed to help us understand how did people in the Bible address and deal with very challenging situations to their community. So I'm going to start the regular slides, and you'll see my picture shrunk to the bottom right. So I am still with you, but I want you to really be able to focus on these slides. So this quote is very much from Hebrews 10, the spirit of our next 4 weeks together. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. Let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another. And that's what we're here to do. So I want to lay out these 4 weeks. We are going to talk about a specific biblical event each session. And today the theme is how community is forged through mutual support, looking at Exodus 17. That text was on one of your reminder emails that came yesterday. And I would just say, be sure you check your spam folders if you have not seen reminder emails from us, because they're there. The second session is going to be how community is forged through prayer. We're going to look at an example from Moses again, this time the book of Numbers, and then a king that is not so well known, Jehoshaphat from Judah. That's a Second Chronicles text. The third session, which gets us into May, some of you may be going back to work by then, depending on where you live, how community is forged through the Holy Spirit. So 2 sessions from the Old Testament, 2 from the New. We'll look at the early church, and specifically the book of Acts chapter 2 and what occurred with Peter and the day of Pentecost. And finally, how community is forged through love. So that's that will be our outline for the next 4 weeks. I chose that word forge very intentionally because it's about community being shaped in times of a crisis or a difficulty, just like metal is forged in the fire of a furnace. And that goes whether it's the community of a family, a workplace, a neighborhood, your town, your church community, or even a group of strangers who go through a crisis or an experience together. Biblical community is forged, shaped, and created often through crises. It's so relevant to us today, and that's the focus of these 4 weeks. I also invite you to think about a deeper sense of community than simply coming together through shared experiences, and that's the one that the Bible really lays out in the book of Mark. So you all are very familiar with this text. If you're not, it's a core text of the New Testament. By the way, I'm going to be using art that I hope you enjoy as well. James Tissot was a wonderful 19th century artist who did over 100 watercolors and oils of biblical scenes. This is one of his. So you recall that a scribe comes up to Jesus and says, "Which commandment is the first of all?" And Jesus answers, "The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." So what I'd invite you to think about is that this is the way biblical community is really forged. Many of you may be familiar with Eugene Peterson, who has written a very contemporary translation or paraphrase of the Bible. What struck me is this very well-known love your neighbor as yourself. He translates as love your neighbor as well as you love yourself. Now just think about that for a minute. I don't know about you, but that affected me differently. Love your neighbor as well as you love yourself. What's so interesting about these simple, well-known words is that it gives us both the what and the how of community. So the what of it is we are to be in relation with each other. This is not a monastery. We're not in a monastic society. We are in community with one another. And the how that's embedded in that second commandment Jesus gave his followers is we do it in love. So we have a relationship with our neighbor, and that relationship is of love. That is biblical community, embedded in that simple text that Jesus was pulling forward from the Hebrew scriptures. Christ Jesus guides us through his teachings in the Gospels. If you want to love God, you actually do it through how you treat your neighbor. That is especially true in the book of Luke. Luke the evangelist wrote 2 volumes, Luke and Acts, and he makes it very clear through the parables that are unique to the Gospel of Luke, like the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan. You show your love for God by how you love your neighbor. So let's think about this as we go forward. Crises like today make us rethink what community means, especially when we can't casually see our friends outside in the neighborhood, at church, at work, at school. There are many stories coming out right now that highlight the power and creativity of community. I'm sure you all have been seeing some of those extraordinary musical groups that are playing alone in their homes, but together with their fellow instrumentalist or chorus and singing these glorious works of great music. And it's so inspiring to us. I wanted to share an earlier story of community that was forged in a crisis and not one anyone shows. And I did that because it points us directly to the Bible, which is our focus. It also, I think, gives an insight into the crises that forged biblical community. Some of you on this call served in the Vietnam War. You may know about Lieutenant Commander Claude Clower. On November 19th, 1967, he was part of a fighter squadron on the USS Coral Sea, bombing North Vietnam when his F-4 Phantom was shot down. He was captured and he was held over 5.5 years in the notorious Hanoi Hilton, and he was finally released in 1973. How the lieutenant commander and his fellow American prisoners survived is one of the great stories to me of community in our modern times. Clower wrote of his own imprisonment, quote, "In the later years of captivity, the North Vietnamese allowed the prisoners to have a Bible for 1 hour on Christmas and on Easter to celebrate the holidays. In doing this, though, they unwittingly gave the POWs access to parts of the Bible throughout the rest of the year." Now, how did this happen? During the hour they had it, 1 hour, the prisoners lined up 2 by 2, and each pair would together memorize a Bible verse by repeating it again and again. As soon as it was set firmly in their memories, they would return for another verse and keep this up until the Bible was taken away. After the Bible was taken, the prisoners used their memories and ink made of cigarette ash to copy the 30 or so memorized verses on toilet paper. To keep their improvised Bible safe, the paper was rolled up and stuffed into a hollowed out bar of soap. And to communicate, the prisoners would tap on the walls using a code system. Clower wrote, "There was never a night I did not hear tap, 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 GG, good night and God bless. If you got caught tapping, you would be tortured." Now, you and I might not have proved our love of God's word in such an extreme situation, but that love, I think, is what led each of you to this webinar today, because you love the scriptures, you want to dive deeper, and guess what? We are a community of several hundred people. And so this is our community right now and our opportunity to explore the scriptures. Such a story does make us wonder what would happen if we studied God's word as if our lives depended on it, with a big emphasis on the hour. They couldn't memorize enough alone, but notice together in community, they created a treasure of verses that Clower said held them together for many, many nights. What the lieutenant commander and his fellow POWs understood, and we understand in our own way, is that the Bible's teachings and the community that formed around learning it is indeed our lifeline, and never clearer than when we face a global threat like this coronavirus. So let's think about community defined. That word community comes from communis, which is a Latin word with a prefix cum, C-O-M, together, and munis, which means to have the charge of. So it means to have the charge of together. A dictionary offers this on community: a social, religious, occupational, or other group sharing common characteristics or interest and perceived or perceiving itself as distinct in some respect from the larger society within which it exists. You and I are a community because we're distinctly here together in using this technology to be together. Synonyms for a community include association, body politic, company, people, and society. But our sense of community that is biblically grounded is based more in words like affiliation, alliance, fellowship, kinship, league, and union. While community can have meaning that may be sociological, psychological, or anthropological, we want to understand the idea from a biblical perspective, and that's what we're doing. So, why is this biblical idea of community important? After all, a lot of people carry common assumptions like, hey, community is well and good, but I'm an individual and I'm unique. And besides, as the saying goes, you can't piggyback your way into heaven. So I'm just doing this by myself. Well, not so fast. It's true that the rigor of following Christ Jesus, watching one's thought, watching one's words and actions, all of these things, being committed to your spiritual growth, all that happens on an individual basis. But as we're seeing in Christ Jesus' teachings, you can't do this as a solo journey. And I'm coming back to that same text when Jesus was talking to the scribes, because it is so much going to be the foundation of everything we do going forward. So, thinking about that, let's look at some questions that I invite you to ask. And remember, everybody, you're getting this handout. We will finish at 5 o'clock Pacific time, 1 hour from when we started. And this is going to be in your email when we finish. It goes out at 5 o'clock, all those handouts. So, questions to ask yourself. To what extent am I a part of a community? How much do I contribute to that community? To what extent am I that community's beneficiary? And to the extent that I am a beneficiary, is there more I can do to contribute? You might say to balance the scale. What communities are you a part of now? Now, in a perfect world, actually, that's not true. If we were doing a regular Bible study like you might do with your friends, 10 or 15 people in a living room or in your church Sunday school or somewhere, you would have it be very interactive. And I love to be interactive, but with this many people, we can't do that. So I was going to ask you to think about the communities you're part of, and then I was going to list them on the slide. So I hope you're kind of doing that as you look. But I'm going to put up the chat box, and I would love for anybody to type in ways that you are in community. I'm just going to pause here for a minute. Can anybody type in anything they can think of about a community that you're part of right now? Let's just see if everybody can type in. Oh, good. I'm seeing some. Okay. And by the way, it's great to see everybody putting where they're from in there. Thank you. Let's see. What communities are you part of? A nursing community, an exercise group, a book club, a community garden, a retail business, a gospel choir, an art gallery. I love this. Your neighborhood, a volunteer at a food bank. You guys, those are wonderful, wonderful things. An artist, a quilting organization. That's great. Okay, so we know we're part of many, many communities. So as we go forward, let's be thinking about what the Bible teaches us about the way we're going to show up in a quilting group or in a gardening club or on a ministry or a social club. All right. So as we go forward, everyone, there will be 2 parts of everything we do. We're going to look at the historical, political, and religious background of some key events, and then we're going to see how we can bring those forward to apply to today. And that it will be the focus. So thank you all for writing those in. I'm going to keep on going. I think we've got great examples. Let's keep going with our slides here. All right. Israel. The very earliest historical evidence that Israel even existed goes back to an Egyptian stela. That's that large piece of stone. It's a black granite slab you see there. It was found in 1210 BC, and it is actually the first textual reference to the word Israel ever outside of Israel's own writings. That makes that a very important fact. For those of you who teach young people, may teach Sunday school or have children or grandchildren, if you ever hear them say the Bible is a myth, this is what's called material culture. It's a way to point to historical archaeological evidence that, in fact, the people of Israel existed as far back as that 13th century BC. Now, what's interesting to me is they didn't exist as a nation, but as a people, or you might say as a community. In other words, Israel was not known for its great human organizations or its great structures. They were known as a community built around their relationship to God. That might sound very familiar to many of you on this webinar, because I suspect many of you are involved in your own church communities. Well, your church community is formed around your relationship to God. People come there to worship together, pray together, support one another through crises. I know many, many churches of all kinds of denominations are meeting online right now. That's to keep that faith community together. Now, what's important about Israel, I'm going to just back up a little bit before we get into our examples of community and say it is Moses. Well, first of all, the Lord's name is Yahweh. That's the Hebrew term for God in much of the Old Testament. The English translation is Lord in the Hebrew scriptures. That name for God is hugely important because the people didn't know God's name before Moses found out God's name at the burning bush. That's very important, and I'll show you the slide. You all probably are very familiar with the text in Exodus that says, when Moses says to God, if I come to the Israelites, God has just told Moses he's going to send Moses back to Egypt to help the Israelites get free. And Moses says, if I come and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Did you ever think about that? Well, I thought his name was God. Well, at the time this burning bush experience happens, God has been called Elohim. That actually was a generic term for God. It meant like the God or a God. But at the burning bush, Yahweh, God says to Moses, this faithful man who is receptive and turns to see the bush, I am that I am. And that has been translated as Yahweh. So God Elohim, that's the word that is initially used, says to Moses, I am who I am. That's Yahweh. He said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. Now, this is the verse we're often most familiar with in these sequences in Exodus 3. Well, right now, if you're like me, you might be asking yourself, what is she talking about? And why is she talking about the name of God? Am I in the wrong place? I thought this was a webinar about the Bible and community. Well, it is. You are in the right place. But here's why I'm talking about it. Because everything Israel did as a community was around their understanding of God. That's why this burning bush incident is so hugely important to the Jewish people. That sense of community about who God is was the spiritual glue that bound them together. The relevancy of the name of God can be answered by your own life, I suspect. It certainly can be by mine. So here are just a few quick examples. We're talking about the relevancy of the nature of knowing God. So there have been times in my life when I really needed to understand God more as truth. So there in Deuteronomy 32, he is the rock. His work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of truth and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. Haven't you had experience? I remember having a business partner who tried to cheat me once. I had to really understand, is truth, God, in control or not? What about the times when you've needed a much deeper understanding of love? I bet everybody on this call has been in rocky moments of relationships when you really needed to reach deeper for that understanding of God as love. As 1 John tells us, beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. Now, you can't live in the United States or anywhere in the world for that matter in April 2020 without thinking about God as life. If you're being saturated daily with death toll numbers based on this virus, we are reaching deeper, aren't we? As a faith community, Christians, Jews, people everywhere, trying to understand God as life. Deuteronomy 30, 19 and 20. Choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, you may cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days. By the way, this artist, William Blake, did over 100 paintings of the Bible, over 30 of them on the book of Revelation. He was considered a mystic and a mystic artist, and you can see from this painting that he is really pointing to some of those more mystical elements of the Bible. Back to biblical Israel. They were enslaved as a community, and they were delivered as a community. So as we begin our first example, looking at Israel as a community, I'd like to invite you to think about 3 questions. Those of you who have been to the talks I've done through the years know these 3 questions well. I've used them over and over, and I use them all the time. First of all, what does the text say? Just what does it say? Historically, geographically, who are the characters, what went before, what came after? Like Columbo, just the facts, ma'am. What does it say? Secondly, what does it mean? This is where you might get more interpretive. Is it a metaphor? Is it a parable? What's it pointing to? And the third one, what does it mean to me, is what takes the Bible's word right off the page. So I just want to say something. I'm not a neutral character about the Bible. It is called the living word for a reason. The ideas that are in our scriptures are the ideas that we build our life on. And when we're in trouble, we go to those words and we find out they're not words relegated to a time thousands of years ago. They're living ideas about the nature of God and our relationship to him. Those living words are what we build our life on. So I'm not asking anybody to be a historian here. We're doing the history. We're looking at things in the biblical context because we need to understand the world that they were in, that these words were written in. But if we don't do the third question, why are we even trying to understand the Bible? So that's what this is about, is to bring it forward. We're going to start by looking at this experience that you all know well of the situation when Moses has led the children of Israel out of Egypt through the Red Sea. Now they're in the wilderness and they are thirsty. And the Bible tells us that Moses is told by God to strike a rock, and a river comes forth, and the people drink. So we know a lot about Moses' leadership in Exodus, such as this particular incident, such as leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. Our story is an account in Exodus 17, verses 8 to 13, that relates how Israel was attacked by Amalek, also known as the Amalekites. These were people living in and around Canaan who were opponents of Israel as they moved from Egypt into the wilderness. Now, just real quick, everybody tell me, what's the most important thing for desert people? Write it in the chat box. I'll be quiet for a second. The most important thing for people who live in a desert. Anybody? Are you writing? Water, 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 water. You got it. Okay. Just want to make sure everybody's out there. It is water. And the thought is the Amalekites were probably concerned about this huge new group of people who were going to take up their water supply, water and shade. Boy, you're somebody who's probably been in Israel or the Middle East. I remember as a student, I was actually, right after I graduated from college, I went on an archaeological dig, and we were at 18 different tell sites. And I remember finding 10 square inches of shade and standing in it. It was August, and I thought I'd never felt such intense sun. So I have total appreciation for these Amalekites who are going, whoa, who are you guys that are coming here to take our water? So let's read this text. I think some of you have read it, but then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Now, Rephidim might mean support or some other things. We'll talk about that. Moses said to Joshua, choose some men for us and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. Whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the sun set, and Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the sword. Now, this artist happens to be a contemporary artist, Joseph Brickey. All right. Now, for some of you, you might think, well, can I see the difference between Aaron and Hur? Some paintings, you can see it more clearly than others. But this is, so far, what the situation is. Now, we're in the part of our 3 questions, which we want to deal with every single week, that is, what does the text say? So I've just read the text. Now let's look a little bit more deeply as we go forward and see what does it really say. So I said Rephidim has been defined as support or resting place, but here's what I want to notice. And I think I even have a way to turn a whiteboard on. Let me just see if I can do this real quick and find a little pointer. Now, do you all see this is Rephidim right down here? This is Mount Sinai right here. The children of Israel are coming from this area. They crossed over here, the Red Sea. But here's what I want you to notice. The Mediterranean is here. In the ancient world, there were 2 huge powers, Egypt here, where it is today, And over in this area off of the map was what we might call the Far East. It might be Assyria at one point in time, the Babylonian Empire at another. But the point was, Egypt built their military forts right here along the sea, because if you were an invading army, nobody in their right mind would cross the desert this way. They'd all come from the sea this way. Does that make sense? Now, if you watch Lawrence of Arabia, or you know your World War II history, you know this crazy Englishman got the Arabs to help him, and he actually fooled the Germans and came into the Gulf of Eilat over this way, across that desert. Now, I need to figure out how to erase all this. I'm just going to do that. Okay, so it won't be quite so messy. Here's what I want you to see. The first battle is down here in Rephidim, because Moses knew from growing up in Pharaoh's court where the military installations were of Pharaoh. So the last thing he's going to do is take the children of Israel this way to get up to the promised land. Remember, this is where he's headed. And so he takes this long route down. And in our text, Exodus 7, we're going to see he's between the wilderness of Sin and the wilderness of Mount Sinai. That tells us immediately he has not yet given the children of Israel the 10 Commandments, nor has he received them from God yet. He's out here in this open area. And sometimes scholars differ where these places are, but many, many people think it's right as this map says. So we're going to think about what was going on with Rephidim here. And what we have is a sudden attack. So Moses is acting very decisively when he tells Joshua to go lead the army, and he's going to head up the mountain. Now, you can imagine what Mount Sinai, why it's called that. When you fly over the Sinai, you see how huge these mountains are. So there are obviously higher areas from this open plain where the fight is taking place, and that's where Moses is headed. And who goes with him? Aaron and Hur. Now here's maybe a better example of where Hur might be a fighter, and here is Aaron, who might be having more of the priestly robes, which was his role. So what is the role of Moses in this story? We just are still at our first question. What is the point of the text? What is the text telling us? This is an example of community in which every member had a role to play to save their community. I would argue exactly like you and I do today. There were two main actions. Joshua is fighting and Moses is praying. Moses' prayers needed the practical engagement of Joshua, and Joshua's fighting needed the infusion of prayer for direction and strength. Both needed the other. That's why I called this community forged through mutual support. The battle did not depend strictly on Joshua's military capabilities, although we'll see as we follow Joshua's career, especially into the book of Joshua, he was a formidable military commander. But it didn't depend on his sword. It was through the prayer of Moses that the people were being directed. And the people needed to keep their eyes on Moses. You know, I love this Psalm 142 here that says, "Accept my prayer as incense offered to you, and my upraised hands as an evening offering." Now, you might wonder, what is this incense about? If you have friends like I do who are Greek or Russian Orthodox, or any of the Eastern Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, any of them, there's a great deal of incense burned in those services. Well, the idea in the ancient world, and we see it in places like the book of Revelation, is that if I burn a candle or smoke a fire, the incense goes where? It wafts up. So God will smell it because God is up. and I'm down. That was obviously the thinking in the ancient world. So when you see incense, it's often tied to prayer. It's moving up. So here is this roll of Moses. Now notice what he has in his hand, that staff. The children of Israel had seen it. They had watched Moses use it to open the Red Sea, to lean on as he was going forward. No doubt he had told them about how it had turned into a snake when he was first at the burning bush. So the people had seen God's delivering power through the sea from the Egyptian armies chasing them. Surely God would bring again deliverance. And we know the text tells us whenever Moses held up his hand, praying to God in that gesture, Moses' humble prayers to God were certainly helping. Now, you and I today, if you watch any television evangelicals, you will see them holding their hands up. Where does that come from but these kind of biblical texts? So many of the gestures of Christians through the centuries come right out of these ancient stories. Next, what was Joshua's role? Here we have the great artist Poussin from the 17th century. And what was Poussin's role? Excuse me, I'm trying to get rid of that. Anyway, the victory of Joshua over the Amalekites is this painting. Let me see if I can clear those. Good. And we know Joshua's role was to be a fighter. He was probably a first-rate swordsman, since that was the weapon of choice. Now I'm going to ask the rest of you, what else do you think Joshua had that caused Moses to appoint him in this critical role to fight off the Amalekites? I'm going to be quiet. You write in your chat box if you would. He certainly had courage, absolutely. And he showed great leadership. Savvy, I love that. Conviction. Obedience. Yes, he was obedient. He never tried to undermine Moses. He never tried to get in Moses' way. He was quiet. Trust in God, conviction, faith, endurance, willingness. Oh, I love these. Confidence, his moral character. You guys are all on it. Okay, all of those were things that he was doing as a leader. Okay, now I love this painting. David Tice is the artist. What is the role of Aaron and Hur? In this case, we really see Aaron on the left with his headdress, holding up Moses' right arm, the staff in Moses' right arm. We see Hur, who probably was a military man or a fighter. Look at his face. What is he seeing down there? There's a lot of battlement going on. These two men needed to help Moses during his long day of prayer as his arms got tired and his hands heavy. By physically holding up his arms, this physical symbol of Moses' prayers were uninterrupted, continuous, unceasing. Fortunately, Aaron and Hur had followed him right up that mountain. This reminds us of a verse in Ephesians 4 that describes when each part is working properly. Aaron and Hur realized with great humility their role that day was simply to support their leader, Moses, and do whatever was needed to help him fulfill his office as leader. This loving gesture of Aaron and Hur's doesn't indicate that Moses was weak, but simply that Moses too needed support. That is community. It is always two ways. The Israelites had been on the receiving end of the blessings of Moses, hadn't they? Those came from Moses' ability to listen and to follow God. Now they needed to give back and help him. You know, I think each one of you was Each one of you has stories of when you have both been helped and helped others. If you can put any of those in a few words, I'm going to invite you first to write, what was a situation when you were helped, when you were perhaps in a leadership position? Can you write in a few words, when were you in a leadership position and when you received support? I'll be quiet while you all type in some things. So my question, I'm not seeing anybody typing. Perhaps you are and I'm just not seeing it. Oh, good. As a project manager, I'm always supported by my team. So true. Inmates, assisted and supported as a chaplain, running a board meeting, a project manager, employees, fellow church members, as a teacher, parents supported you, mentored in a new teaching position. These are wonderful. As a first reader in a church, leading a program, teaching support of other teachers, starting a new discovery bound program, students supporting you in a classroom, a camp counselor, being a garden chair for the condo, a jury foreman, a mom, president of a homeowners association, as a professor, working with second graders, how wonderful. The director of UCLA Model United Nations Project. You guys, you have been in such tremendous roles. Dean of Students, I love seeing these. Leading a sales team, a work team. Children supported you when making tough decisions. The Salvation Army supported you when you had to evacuate your home. I'm so sorry. A realtor, a potluck, a skydive. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's pause on those. Now I'm going to ask you, when have you supported others? What role have you been in when you were the one giving the support? Let's see what you come up with those. Evaluated my character. My brother helped me move. Great. Team lead for programs at work. How have you been a supporter? When you loved, absolutely, brought groceries in, gave copies of the Christian Science Monitor, worked on ski patrol, sharing work meetings, aging parent, loving child. You all, you've been in so many of these roles. Thank you. Beautiful answers. So what I'm getting from this is that you understand this story from your own life. You understand community is forged through how you have both given and received support. And that is exactly what this story of Moses, Aaron, and Hur is all about, and Joshua on the battleground. Now, Bible study question number 2. I'm going to ask everybody to just stay with me here. What does the story mean? Everything we've talked about up till now, everyone, is what does the text say? Now, what does it mean? What is Moses holding up? He's holding up God's power and presence and care for his people. Rephidim was the last camping place before Mount Sinai, where Moses will receive the 10 Commandments. Does it make you wonder, did this exact experience prepare Moses for receiving the 10 Commandments? I've never asked myself that question until preparing this for you all. Once you begin to see the chronological order of events in our Bible, all kinds of new insights start coming. So I'm going to ask you to think about this, not to put your answers in, but to think with me, and maybe you can do this when you get your handout at 5 o'clock Pacific time. You can write in, there's a note space against each of these slides. Maybe you can write in here, how did this experience of Aaron and Hur and Joshua and all the people fighting the Amalekites, how did this prepare Moses for receiving the 10 Commandments? Did it have anything to do with it? Let's keep going. Moses until now had been a tremendous leader, yet all leaders need support and encouragement, and that's what these men provided. Now, what you all have been doing in this chat box is answering question 3, the application question. How does this story apply to the third question? What does it mean to me? So far, what I'm getting from the chat remarks is that you're remembering very vividly the times when you have both been a support to others and been on the receiving end of others' support. So some of the answers or some of the questions you might be asking yourself right now in our time of this virus. Do we have a time of testing where we need to lift thought to God, to pray without ceasing, as the Bible says? If we are in a leadership role right now, are we heading up the mountain alone? Or is there anyone with us? That's a sobering question. How many of us are kind of chunking it out, going it alone, just charging forward? Or are we gently, lovingly, gratefully bringing others with us? How do we bring others along? Do we have people around us that offer us support, lift us up when we get discouraged, and conversely need support? So bottom line, who is holding up your arms right now? And whose arms are you holding up right now? Now, if you like, you can think about this and write it in your notes for yourself. If after we pause and you want to put some answers in the chat room, please do that. But what I'm trying to do is not have you just think about past experiences, which you've just done beautifully. I want you now to think about this moment in time. If you are sheltering in place, whose arms are you holding up? And who is holding your arms up? What community are you in? How are you offering support? How are you receiving support? We each have a role to play in our largest community called the world. At one level, it might mean we wear a face mask when we go out. I love to walk on the beach. I go very early in the morning. I even wear my face mask out there because I might pass somebody that would be fearful if I didn't wear it. So that's a loving thing I can do. Or when I go into a grocery store, of course, our grocery doesn't let us come in without a face mask on. Or are we convening in church services as we normally would, or on a Zoom platform or something like this? You might say that is the equivalent of Joshua's practical steps of fighting the army. Moses represents our best prayerful efforts at this moment in time. Moses prayed all day. What is the equivalent of that in our lives? The Bible tells us to pray without ceasing. How can we do that? How can we see the enemy on this field of battle? As our president says, an invisible enemy. How can we fight this enemy through prayer? There are probably many ways to apply this story, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I know some of you are typing in, like, my church is supporting me with online services. You bet. Fellow Christians who have enlisted to lessen evil, sin, disease, holding up inmates' arms as a chaplain. And What about when one must actively reach out for help? Sometimes people don't know we need help unless we reach out. Boy, am I glad you wrote that. That is so true. So true. We have to be on the alert for that. So as we get near our final slide, I'm going to ask you all to think about how we support those first responders out there, all of the health professionals, the grocery clerks, etc. I always think about the people who never signed up to be a first responder, like the people who, when we pull up at a restaurant and they come out with our food bag and we never touch hands because they put it in the trunk. But aren't those people working so hard and deserve our support? But even more in biblical community, how do we pray for our world, our city, our country, our state, as our governors are given great leeway to open up states? So I'm seeing some of you are participating in hymn sings, you're being part of church services, you're watching your own thought with friends and family. Some of you are calling friends who live alone at least once a week. What a wonderful thing to do. You're putting up humorous things on Facebook. Those are all great ideas. Some of you are working as reading room librarians, and although the reading room might be closed, you're sending articles to members. Others of you are in a prayer group. Some of you are running errands for friends. Some of you are helping businesses the best way you can. These are just tremendous answers, you all. What a great job you're doing. So I just want to offer some parting thoughts before we finish. And I know some of you had a few technological challenges. I want to say a huge thank you to James and his team. Without them, there is no way this webinar would have happened. So I want to say a huge thanks. I'm going to remind you that in about 3 minutes, all of you will have in your inbox the handout that is the full set of slides from this. You can print it out or keep it online. I also want to invite you to prepare for our second session, which is a week from now. It will be on April 28th at 4 p.m. Pacific as well. Your assignment is a brief text, Numbers 21, 4 through 9. Again, this is a text you'll probably be familiar with. It is not too late to invite friends. The great beauty of a webinar like this is that we have unlimited space, and we would love to invite your friends. It's the same link. They can go to prayerthatheals.org. They can also find it on the Bible Roads website. They can find it here through this. I'll just see if the whiteboard is still on. If I can draw right here, for those of you who had this invitation, that's the link. If you got a JPEG file, that's only a picture, so it's not a live link, but it's right here. You can find it in your homework. So as we stop, I want to say a huge thanks to everybody, and I'm going to be quiet for a moment. Let's watch you all put in your chat comments. Will there be a replay available? Yes. Thank you, Barbara, for the reminder. It is 5 o'clock almost Pacific time. The replay will be available in exactly 1 hour, and you will get a second email for that. So just to be clear, I'm going to end my slides for a moment and stop the slide presentation. And let's see if I can get myself back. I might be able to. There, hello. I'm going to just say that there are 2 emails coming to you. It's 4:59 Pacific. In 1 minute, everybody will get the email that is the handout. In 1 hour from now, you will get the email. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. You'll get the email that is the handout at 5 o'clock in 1 minute. In an hour, you'll get the email that is the replay. And you might want to do the replay with your handout in front of you. We don't give you the handout ahead because it's a lot for people to look at their handout, look at the screen, deal with the chat room. So we're just giving you the handout immediately after. So I'm going to just leave the chat room up for a few minutes. I want to say a huge thank you to every single one of you. Some of you I've known for years, some of you I've never had the joy of meeting, but thank you. We are part of a new community. Thank you to the Ventura Second Church for having this brilliant idea that so many of us are taking advantage of. And I just want to say, have a wonderful week, and let's just keep looking to our Bibles for all of our inspiration, and we know it's there. God bless everyone. You all, I just want to say how much I treasure these comments, and what a community you are forming. I love watching you all talk to each other, and believe me, it takes all of us to do this. Wonderful community for all over the world. I love watching you all talk to each other, and believe me, I'm glad you like the maps, Rich. I love maps. It helps me understand. And I did turn my audio off for a moment, Tim, because I was talking to James. So I turned it back on when I wanted to talk to you all. I just had to touch base with my team, thank them for all they're doing. Isn't it fun? Richard Horner, yes, it is unifying to all be together. I am seeing dear friends from Maine and here in Colorado and Canada, all over. You guys are just terrific. So I'm so glad this was helpful, and we're just going to keep diving in. So bless everybody. I'm going to turn off the comments now. Yes, Connecticut. We wouldn't forget Connecticut, Barbara Bellafiore. All right. Love to everybody. Bye-bye.